Have you ever wondered why you freeze when it's time to ask for that donation or make that offer or ask someone to support your vision? Or maybe when you are getting ready to post on social media, you freak out and you're like, why is this so hard? Well, here's the secret. You might be actually struggling with the trauma tax. That's right. The psychological and spiritual price that we pay for having unresolved trauma in our past that we've never faced and we never healed from. So, if this is you, I want you to tune in for this hour episode or maybe 30 minutes or so, where we're diving right into how we can recover and reclaim our power from the trauma tax. I'm Reverend Jocelyn, and I am the host of the Sister Start Your Ministry Hour, where women from across the country huddle together live at 6:30 p.m. Central every Sunday night, and we talk about all things faith, ministry, and Christian business. This is for my sisters out there who are on mission to make an impact in this world, whether it's through ministry in the church, ministry beyond the walls of the church. Maybe you're a Christian woman entrepreneur, and all you know is that you want to do something in your life that leaves a legacy. This hour is committed to you. Now, if you're one of my first timers, welcome, sis. I'm so glad that you are here. And I want you to do me a big favor and introduce yourself in the chat so I know that you are watching. Okay. Even if you're watching the replay, please put your name in the chat. Let me know where you're watching in from. Also, I have a gift for you. For anyone who tunes in weekly, I want you to be able to get my Ministry Launch Starter Kit. And I say ministry, but it's also for any Christian woman entrepreneur. It's going to show you how to organize your ministry, market what you're doing, and really increase your impact. And so you can get that for free at sisterstartyourministry.com. All right, so download that kit. And last thing is for my newbies, you want to make sure that you subscribe because throughout the week, I am dropping videos that's going to really help you to stay focused on the vision that God has given you. I also want to give a shout out to those who are watching live, all my regular sisters who are tuning in week after week, whether it's Diana, Pastor Valerie, Dr. Arlene, whoever's watching live right now, be sure to put your name in the comments for me. I am going to be commenting back and forth again this week in the comments. Okay, so just watch the comments for me, just riding along with you. All right. So now we are here today to talk about the trauma tax. And it's funny because I was thinking about a quote from Benjamin Franklin. He says that there are two things certain in life: death and taxes. And don't we know that to be true? I mean, let's think about it. Those times in which you might have gotten that paycheck, your first paycheck on a job, and they promised you a certain salary. It was like 50,000, maybe 60,000, whatever your salary was, 100,000. And you see your check and you look at this check and you be like, somebody stole my money. Wait a minute. Didn't they say I'm supposed to get this per week? Where did all my money go? I know you've been there before. And if you have, baby, you got hit by some taxes. And they took that money out before you even had a chance to see the money that you earned. And that's what happens with the trauma tax. Essentially, when it comes to the trauma from our past, we might be thinking that we're operating at 100% capacity, when in reality, that first 20, 25% is affected or taken out from the trauma that we've had in our past. Let me explain. So for you might be trying to operate at 100%, but subconsciously, you're having like a decrease of your efforts by 20 or 25% due to negative thoughts of being a failure, not being good enough, fear of rejection. Your capacity, your imprint is being decreased by these negative thoughts, these negative stories, these beliefs that have been embedded from your past due to unresolved trauma. And this shows up, sisters, in ways that you don't even understand. And I'm going to talk about a couple things that we want to pay attention to. Now, there is a concept that we talk a lot about in the mental health space, and it's called the wounded child. The wounded child. And it's this belief that we have a wounded child inside of us that really is struggling for healing, seeking healing in different areas. And this wounded child, some of us, we're not even aware that this wounded child is existing. Maybe it's something that was said to you as a child. Maybe someone, you know, teased you, you were bullied. Maybe it was something that wasn't really meant to harm you, but you interpreted it as rejection. Or maybe you had a parent who walked on you and you struggle with abandonment, or you struggle with rejection. Whatever that is, I tell you this, it shows up in how you do ministry. It shows up in relationships. It shows up in business in ways that you don't even understand. There's a quote that I'm looking at by Stephen Bartlett. On his podcast, The Diary of a CEO, he frequently says that your business will eventually grow to the exact size of your unhealed trauma and then stop until you do the work. And I think that's profound because for many of us, we have been struggling and not understanding why. We just have like this mental block in this area. Like we really want to start posting more. We really do want to start making offers. We really do want to write the book or speak on stages. But there's this block here and we're like, oh, I don't understand why. If this is speaking to you, I want you to say something in the comments around the struggles that you've had. And if there is a mental block, what is that block for in terms of what God is calling you to? Has God been asking you or positioning you or wrestling with you about stepping out and starting your own business, writing a book, speaking on stages, posting more? Put in the comments for me what that thing is. And understand that there's a chance that that trauma tax is what's impacting your ability to get beyond, to move forward in that area that God is calling you to. And here's the catch. Even as you grow, even as you ascend in the area that God is leading you to, maybe you do like launch your business. Maybe you do start speaking, but don't think just because you are starting to get some traction and you're rising up that this trauma tax goes away. Particularly if you rise further, if you start getting more notoriety, that's going to be the time in which the imposter syndrome or those sounds from your past, those echoes from your past are going to be like, you think you deserve a seat here? You think you're good enough? This is when the enemy, the devil, really likes to step up his game and try to tell us that we're not enough. So that trauma tax definitely acts as a what's the word I'm looking for? A surcharge as it relates to our beliefs in ourselves. It taxes us even more. So we have to understand that the higher we ascend, the more important it is for us to address and deal with the pain from our past, because it's only going to show up more in the work that we do. Right? There's another quote that I'm going to share with you from James Wheatmore, I believe is how he pronounces his name. Your business is the ultimate self-development tool. And I'm going to say the same thing. It says business. He says business, but it could be your ministry. It can also, I think, apply to your relationships. But he says your business is the ultimate self-development tool because it acts as a mirror for your soul. It will expose every wound you haven't healed, every insecurity you've tried to hide, and every limiting belief you still carry. You cannot grow a business or ministry beyond the level of your own growth, because the moment you hit a ceiling in your revenue, you haven't hit a ceiling in your healing. Wee. He is hitting on something. And it's true. I want you to think about, particularly for my Christian women entrepreneurs out there, how you might be struggling with certain things like making an offer for people to work with you. And you are scared, like you freak out at the idea of putting a price behind your services. What is that coming from? What is that narrative coming from? Why do you freak out so much? You want to really think about that. Do you think that when someone says no to the offer, they're rejecting you personally, that you're not good enough? How do you interpret that no? Why does it feel like you're jumping out of an airplane when you're preparing to speak on stage, or when you're preparing to do a post on social media? Why do you go into fight or flight mode? There's something that's there. I think about this even for myself. One of the things that, low key, I'm letting you in on a little secret, that I really love to do is sing. Now, when I'm singing in my house, singing in the shower, oh boy, I'm kind of like Whitney Houston over here. I'm having a good time. I ain't no Whitney Houston, but I do enjoy singing. And it's one of the things that I would love to sing for the Lord. But for whatever reason, since I was a little girl, I think back to when I was in a play as a child. I mean, I was like maybe seventh grade. I played Dorothy in The Wiz, and I had to sing in front of an auditorium of people. And I was so nervous. I was so scared that people were going to judge me, that I literally, after I did my solo performance, I was in tears. I was freaking out. I was like, oh, I wasn't good enough. Da, 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 da. And ever since then, when I had the moment to sing, I would just like go out of my mind crazy with fear. And it was like something that was arresting. And I think to myself, Jocelyn, where is that coming from? Like, again, you're having a fight or flight response, like a bear's chasing you type response to singing in front of people. Just like you might have that same experience when you are preparing to make a post, when you're thinking about speaking on stage, when you're thinking about applying for a certain position or making an offer. And it really boils down to something that I heard Tony Robbins talk about recently in one of his podcasts. He talks about the 3 S's when it comes to us moving forward in our work and our vision. And he talks about how a lot of times we focus on having the right strategy. And you might be focusing on having the right strategy as it relates to growing your social media, getting your book out there, starting your podcast. You can take all the courses in the world. But what holds many of us up is the story. The second S, the story that we tell ourselves, the story that little Jocelyn told herself back in 7th grade when she was freaking out on stage, that people are going to judge me. I'm not good enough. I have to be perfect. These stories, these narratives that probably trace back to when I was really young. And that is impacting our ability to ascend. That's impacting our ability to really move forward into what God is calling us to. And it's arresting our joy, and it's impacting our power and ability to make impact. And so we really have to dissect that story. The last S that he talks about, which I'm just going to just say so I can complete that thought, is your mental state. And our mental state is often impacted by also different narratives in our environment around us. And so today, I'm going to take us back to that story, our narrative, the things that we really struggle with, and that wounded child that's struggling with abandonment, that wounded child that feels like they have to control everything to brace themselves so they don't have to get hurt again. It shows up in how you show up in work. It shows up in your ability or lack of ability to delegate. It shows up in every area of your business and your ministry. One of the questions that I often ask sisters who I am coaching, who are in leadership in their church, in their ministry or business is, are you leading people or are you bleeding on people? And I want you to put that in the chat. Are you leading or are you bleeding? Ooh, wee, ooh, wee. Now, if you are leading from a place not of insecurity. You're leading from a place of a confidence of knowing who you are and not running from your pain and not necessarily looking at people when they say no to you or when they challenge you as a threat. But you're at a place where you are emotionally intelligent enough to recognize possible triggers in your life, recognize your weaknesses, and you're able to lead people from a place of wholeness versus bleeding on people. When we bleed on people, we let our unresolved stuff, our baggage, bleed out on folks so that they're paying the price for our unresolved pain. And so we want to be cognizant of that, and we want to deal with that because eventually it's going to hinder if it hasn't already, your growth, and it's going to negatively impact the people who you actually want to serve and support, the people who are closest to you, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your children, whether it's the people who you're leading inside your church ministry, whether it's the people who you're leading out, like inside of your business. Are you leading or are you bleeding? And the next question that I often like to ask, and this is one that you really want to think about, is when it comes to the challenges that you faced in your life, those traumatic events that you've gone through. Most of us, if we live long enough, we've experienced some trauma. But the question is your story or what you've gone through your prison or your platform? That's another one I want you to put in the comments. Is it your prison or is it your platform? Because many sisters who start off their ministries or their faith-based businesses, it was an inciting incident. It was something that they'd gone through that they overcame. Maybe they're a domestic violence survivor. Maybe they're a human trafficking survivor. Maybe they'd gone through something really difficult as a child. They were abused, left, went through grief, whatever the case may be. And that's what really inspired them to start their nonprofit, to start their ministry, which is a beautiful thing. But going back to what I asked earlier about leading or bleeding, sometimes we step out so early in our process and we are bleeding on people. And our story is really something that is also our prison because we're continuing to relive the trauma. You know, I remember over the last several years, I've had a podcast. I've interviewed hundreds of people. And in one of the interviews that I did, I talked to a sister who experienced some very traumatic things in her life. And she was on my show and I was interviewing her. And the way in which she was expressing or telling her story was done in such a way where I can tell she was reliving her trauma. She was reliving it in such a way that even though she wanted to tell her story to help other people, she was actually re-traumatizing people. She was harming the people who she wanted to serve, which was actually, unfortunately, a disservice because she still had not done the work around her healing. When you want to share your testimony to help others, first, you share your story to do your own work, to help yourself to heal. And that's when you share it in private places with a counselor, with maybe with a pastor, with a close friend as you're working through those emotions. But I encourage you to wait to publicly share your story until you've had time to process it and you're not sharing your story from an open wound. You are sharing your story from a healed scar. So you still remember it, but you're not in it. You're not like reliving your trauma. You are standing on your story so that it can inspire others. Because what happens is instead of helping others, what you're doing, if you have not healed and you're trying to tell your story, you are trauma dumping. You are dumping your trauma on somebody and they are in the valley now with you and they like, oh my goodness. I mean, they need therapy after just listening to you because you completely triggered them versus taking them from this valley and helping them to see, okay, there's hope and this is what I learned. And not necessarily telling them all the graphic details, but telling them, okay, this is the emotions I felt, to meet them where they are so you can draw a connection and then share with them the journey of ascension. So by the time they finish hearing your story, they are up here. They're here at the mountaintop understanding, okay, there is hope. So we want to make sure that we don't trauma dump on people. And we also have to understand that sometimes that when we have experienced trauma, it's not so much that we're trauma dumping, but we make the trauma our prison. We have so much shame around our story. And so we would dare not tell it publicly because we feel embarrassed by it. But again, this is one of those things where I encourage you to do the work, to find a therapist, to find safe spaces where you can work through your pain, because your situation, the trauma that you've gone through, is not who you are. It's not your identity. And it's for sure not something that God wants you to keep holding on to and interpreting as your identity, because it's going to keep you locked up. That is not God's plan for you. God is a healer, and God wants you to experience healing in your life so that at some point your story can be a testimony for someone else. But until you have done the work, until you have really faced your pain versus stop running from your pain, you are going to be struggling with things like shame. And it will be a prison versus a platform that can really help set someone free. I share the story about how, for me, one of the biggest areas that I struggled with shame was the fact that I left my marriage after a very short period of time. I was only married for a couple months, and I left the marriage because I was being abused. And I really felt a lot of shame because I said to myself, Jocelyn, you would do this work in trauma healing. You took classes on domestic violence. How in the world did you not see this? And so that was the story that I was telling myself for a very long time around this. And I had to work through therapy to really reauthor my story and say, no, this is not something to be ashamed about. I'm not carrying someone else's shame who harmed me and did something against me. No, it took courage for me to make a decision to leave, despite the societal pressures to stay in marriage, despite the reputation or me being public or whatever. I chose something that was life-giving, and God released me from that. And even though I ignored the signs before going into the marriage, because I had to recognize my role in my own pain, I did ignore the signs. At the end of the day, God's forgiven me for not listening to him when he said, Jocelyn, don't move forward in this. But God's grace is sufficient. And once I let go of that narrative and reauthored my story, I was at a place where I had the courage to share my story publicly around leaving. And I cannot tell you how many women came forward after that experience saying, me too. I'm talking about pastors' wives. I'm talking about people who I knew, like I thought I knew them, had no idea they are being abused in their marriage and situation too. It freed so many people. And for one sister, I remember she had reached out to me, and she had told me that she was currently in an abusive situation with someone at her church. And she called me in tears saying, Jocelyn, this happened to me. I don't think anybody is going to believe me. And I told her, I said, listen, I believe you, and you are going to get through this. And I connected her with some resources, just spent a little bit of time with her. And a couple months later, she chose to leave that abusive situation. So proud of her. And she's doing well, doing extremely well. And we were just catching up again a couple months later by phone. And she kept telling me, she was like, thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm like, of course, I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm happy that my story helped you. But she said, no, you don't understand. The day that I called you in tears, I had a plan to take my life. And so you coming forward with your story, it saved me. And when she said that, I said, oh my God, this is a reminder that our story that once was our prison, because it definitely was the prison for me at one point, it can become a platform that could be used to set someone free. But you have to be willing to do the work first. One of the things that I firmly believe is that when it comes to our healing, we benefit. We benefit from having a strong counselor in our corner. Granted, I'm the owner of a Christian counseling company, but I believe in what I teach, and I'm in therapy regularly. I was in therapy like during the abusive marriage. I was in therapy immediately after, and I'm still in therapy today, processing what I've gone through, learning and growing. And so I encourage you, if you don't have a counselor in your life and you're looking for someone, it's worth the investment. You are worth the work, because when it comes to healing, we're peeling back layers of things that have happened in our past. I want you to think about an onion. An onion has layers to it. So you might only be familiar with one thing that took place, but underneath that, you're finding other things. Underneath that, you're finding other things. You're finding trends. You're tracing the core to see why certain habits, to see why for me, there were certain habits of behavior where it made it difficult for me to set boundaries in relationships, not only romantic relationships, but in friendships, in workplace, because I had an issue with people pleasing that traced all the way back to childhood. And it shows up in every area, in relationships, whether it's platonic, romantic, or professional. And it impacts how you show up in business. And so for you, if you're seeking to grow, if you're seeking to launch, you want to have two people. Well, there's more than two, but these two at least on your team. You want to have both a coach and a counselor. The counselor helps you to deal with some of that emotional static from your past. A counselor is going to help you with all the things I was talking about as it relates to your healing, reframing, reauthoring your story, and your coach is going to help you to move forward with ascending in that vision, to help you with the strategy, to help you to really launch forward. But if you don't deal with the story, like Tony Robbins said, and don't get your state of being correct based on the narrative and some of the habits that you set for yourself, then what the coach is going to tell you as it relates to the strategy relates to, okay, this is how you execute your marketing strategy, or this is what you need to do here, or this is how you need to show up on stage. The coach can tell you what to do all day from a strategy standpoint. But if you have not dealt with your unresolved drama and trauma, is going to be something that's going to hold you back every time. And so your question is your story your platform or your prison? And we get to change that. We get to decide how we are going to move forward so that our painful experiences on our from our past can serve as a payday. That is, that's something where, again, no pain needs to be wasted. There's certain things that we had no control over. It was not our fault. It was not even God's plan, I believe, for us. There's certain things that when it comes to gun violence or like abuse, God didn't want that for us. God was with us through it while we were in it, but that was the result of Satan. That was the result of us being in a fallen world, our other people's sinful nature, that tragically we do sometimes have to suffer through certain things, but God did bring us through it. God sustained us through it, and God will redeem. He will help us to heal from those things that took place in our past, so that at some point, what was our cage can be something that could be used to help set other people free. And so this is where, sisters, I'm challenging you to ask yourself these questions around, all right, what are the areas in my life where I really struggle in, particularly as it relates to ministry and business and the work that God is calling us to? Is there areas where I'm hypersensitive? Are there areas where I freak out? I'm afraid. Are there areas in which I know that God has really shown me a vision for me to go further in this area, but something is holding me back? What could happen as relates to your ministry or business if you actually took time to really deal with that, to really get at the root, versus you trying to just try harder and or say to yourself, oh, I'm a failure. Oh, no. Let's really think about the root cause behind the fear, the anxiety, the doubt, the imposter syndrome, the reason why you know what to do, but you won't do what you desire to do. for me, I suggest, sister, that this is the trauma tax. This is the tax that we are paying that we don't even realize is coming out of our cash flow, is impacting our ability to grow, is impacting us in so many ways. So my question for you is, are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to say, enough is enough? I'm tired of living this way? Because we can't control certain things that happen to us in life. Certain things that happened to us was out of our control. But what we do get to control is how we respond, is how we react to those things. And we get to say, okay, I'm choosing differently. All right. I am controlling my controllables. My controllables, if you will, is I'm going to get into therapy. I'm going to continue to read my word. I'm going to do the work outside of therapy because your therapist is not a miracle worker. I'm going to do the work outside of therapy, the journaling, the reflecting, the sitting in, the feeling the emotions, to really ask ourselves those important questions so that we can experience the fullness of what God has for us and what God wants to do through us. Okay. And so, sisters, my prayer for you is that we are no longer going to be paying this trauma tax. We are going to experience healing so that we can leave from a place of wholeness and can really support others in a way that makes impact. So, if this message spoke to you today, please share in the comments with me your biggest takeaway. And if you are a sister who is looking for support in growing your ministry, your nonprofit, maybe speaking or writing that book, or you just want to have a purpose-driven business that leaves a legacy, and you're serious about that, but you need a little help, then I want to encourage you to schedule a ministry and business accelerator call with me, where we talk about your goals, we talk about where God is leading you, and we talk about what support is needed for your life to help you to make that next step. All right, so the information for that is below. I hope to connect with you, learn more about your ministry. And again, thank you for tuning in and hanging out with me today, whether you're in the replay or watching live. And be sure to set your calendar for next week, same time, same channel, as we help you to grow that vision that God has put on your heart. Special thanks to those who watched live today. I love you so much, sisters, and I look forward to seeing you next week. You take care. God bless.